Hi, everyone. I am Hayley Perry, founder and CEO of Dandy Day, and I am joined today by the lovely Dr. Nicole Acevedo from Elavo Mundi Solutions. Good morning, Nicole. How are you?
Good morning. I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing really great. A little tired, but great. And so happy to be here with you to talk about clean beauty and social justice.
Likewise.
So, um, we've done a lot of work together, really working on the Danny Day sustainability solutions report and solutions. We spent a lot of time together working on that. And even after that, still new things come to mind about the research that we did together and the compilation. And so this is kind of a new topic that I was really curious about, the clean beauty and social justice. And so, of course, given your experience, you are the premier scientist, I would say, in the industry, and some of your credentials. We could go back. You really are focused on reproductive health and environmental health, and so you have over 20 years of expertise in understanding the human health risk of everyday exposures to harmful chemicals. And this didn't come to you overnight, did it?
No, it did not. No, it did
Okay.
not.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background and your amazing qualifications and credentials as a scientist?
Yeah, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Yeah, I mean, all I can say is that I have been very passion driven to follow the work. The work has guided me. So I give the work the credit, not so much myself, but I am a reproductive health scientist who has also been really focused in, as you mentioned, environmental health factors. So one area of my research expertise that was an area that I dedicated quite some time to was in the study of endocrine disrupting chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
So really understanding chemicals, primarily those that are industrial chemicals that we're exposed to in a variety of ways in our everyday life, and how they can impact our health and also the health of the environment. We think about other species as well. And a lot of times those species are what we call sentinel species. They're the ones that kind of indicate to us that there might be some bigger problems that we as humans should be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So that field of study really, which is a very young field of study, it's about 30, almost 40 years old now,
Mm-hmm.
and has really brought a lot of awareness about how we need to think about the way we are in the world, the space that we take up as humans, and the impacts that we have on ourselves and other, like I said, all other species, particularly in the way that we create things that we may not have full knowledge of their impacts at the time. So that's really been the depth and breadth of how I've focused, not just my work, but really, as I said, my passions and how I kind of move through life in the places that I put my energy. And hopefully my experience will continue to grow in those areas. So yeah, once again, it's about really understanding how we can navigate the world that we live in and make better choices through just different ways of informing ourselves from maybe the way that we've been taught in a lot of the spaces. So,
Oh, thank you so much for um, sharing your background, and your passion always um, shows up. And and I think even beyond that, like your humility, you're always like so humble, Nicole, every time I talk to you, and really the things that you've added to industry and to society has been incredible. And so I'd like to know a little bit more about how you about your entrance into the beauty industry. So I think you've been in the industry for about 6 years now. And so can you share with us a little bit about that?
yeah, six, almost seven. It's amazing how quickly time flies. So once again, my passion really in the work that I do is about helping to understand more the implications of the different chemicals and exposures that we have in our everyday world and how they impact our health. And so that was really my focus for a long time. And I was presented with a really interesting opportunity in 2015 to move from more of academic research in all of these areas into the beauty industry.
Mhm.
So I was hired on to work as principal scientist for Beauty Counter in 2015. Which is a young emerging company in the safer cosmetic space. I was really, really focused on how to create products safer and more sustainable from the ground up,
Mm.
how to really change the paradigm in the beauty industry. This was before clean was even a word that
Mhm.
was being used. And I was intrigued at how, well, as much as I really hope that regulation will meet us where we need it to meet us to provide safer solutions, the marketplace looks like, it can be a really powerful force for change. So I was intrigued enough to take the big leap and move into the beauty industry at that time, and have never looked back,
Mhm.
because I've just been really, really humbled and impressed at just how much power not just the marketplace, but consumers have in really dictating the changes in the marketplace that we're seeing in such a short amount of time. So that's really what brought me to the space, and what keeps me really interested in continuing to move in this space, and hopefully providing guidance and experience and expertise as to how to maneuver the stages that we're going to be moving into even more fully, into deeper stages of sustainability and safer chemistries, and all these different innovative platforms that we see coming up that are really changing the face of the beauty industry in what I firmly believe are really, really positive ways that both help with the health and also maintain the innovative vigor and also the marketplace potentials for growth.
Mhm.
This is, after all, a place where we're all wanting to grow and build in all different ways. And I think that it's just the options are really, really, they're really booming. So I'm really excited to be in this space and continue to be in it for a long time.
Yeah, well, we're lucky to have you as an industry, especially with, you're bringing that different field of study to the cosmetic science, and it is changing the way that we're doing things.
Mhm.
And that's not bad. I embrace change. I think change is great, but it's not easy. It's hard. Change can oftentimes be hard, and but asking the hard questions, right? Struggling through, like, what it means when there's a new piece of information introduced. Where does it fit? How do
Right.
we incorporate that? And how does that change things along the way? I think we're all in the midst of that right now, and so I am curious what you've noticed about clean beauty from the time that you started in the industry about 6 years ago, where it wasn't a word yet. And I remember when the word like came to life, and I was like, "Oh, clean beauty! It's going to be this new thing." It's like, this is the future. But tell me, I'm curious, like, from your experience, what have you noticed in this fast and furious shift?
Yeah. And one of the things that I love, I'm a huge history buff, and I really love taking the long view of things, because, and then revisiting what's happened before,
Mhm.
because, humans, we tend to repeat history a lot, whether.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of human nature is, based on your personal experience in the life that you're
Mhm.
leading. You tend to see life as like whatever's happened in your lifetime is what's normal, and is probably what's been done forever, right? So the forever paradigm. And
Mhm.
that's really not the case. It's really important to really take a look as to when were significant changes made in the way that we kind of inhabit the earth and our place in it. And
Mhm.
so, when we think back to, the world as it was 100 years ago, it was an incredibly different planet than what we inhabit today. You know, it wasn't until, around World War II, so in the mid 40s, so not even 100 years, 70 something years, where we started to really manufacture globally, but manufacture chemicals that had never existed on this planet before.
Mhm.
And we started to do it at a really fast rate and a high volume.
Mhm.
So, here we are today, where we've manufactured globally well over 85,000 distinct chemicals that never existed before, at different volumes of use. And many of those haven't been fully studied for their impacts on our health or the health of the environment and the impact that they have. And so once again, taking the long view, well, how do we assess safety? We tend to think about toxicology. We all, those of us that work in this industry and any consumer goods space, we hear about toxicology. So that's the study of understanding the safety of chemicals. It's like, what will kill you, what won't kill you. Toxicology, as we practice it, is a very young field. I mean, truly, the toxicology that most people use today was really established as a form in the 1970s. So once again, 40-something years, maybe almost 50 years. But, it's still a young-ish science, and it's using what was known at the time and kind of how we understand safety. And so I always like to bring to light this, challenge a bit the notion of the dose makes the poison. A lot of us hear that phrase. And the idea is that, well, there's a dose that will kill you of anything, any chemical. It could be water. Water at a high rate can kill you, can drown, right? And then if you kind of create a line down from like the dose that will kill you, and you kind of extrapolate down, you should be able to find a dose that's safe for human use, or, that won't harm maybe other species. So that's the premise that toxicology uses. And for certain types of hazard endpoints, and what we call a hazard endpoint is something that you're assessing, like, is it a cancer-causing, agent, or can it mutate your genes, or can it affect your reproductive potential? There's different ways that you assess hazard. For some of those, yeah, you can find a dose that will kill you. You can find a dose that might cause cancer, and then maybe you come down, and it seems like there aren't any like major effects on the system, so it should be fine. So that's really how we've addressed safety. And I like to challenge that, because we can't think about safety all in the terms of if it's going to kill you, if it's toxic. And that's where the field of endocrine disruption really opened my eyes to understanding that there are these things called low dose exposures. There are chemicals, whether they be man-made or natural, that can actually have really, really significant long-term health effects at very low dose exposures and a consistent daily exposure. So it's about thinking that we need to assess the way we think about, way we interact with what we put on our bodies, put in our bodies, the air we breathe, a little bit differently. And that's where, coming back to your question about clean beauty, is it's about really the interface of understanding that has already been a tremendous amount of work in some areas of health and safety with cosmetic ingredients, right, around toxic effects, but that we need to be maybe a little bit more precautionary, and that we maybe need to be looking at some other endpoints and thinking, is this really safe? And so that's where the shift has happened over the last 20, 25 years. So even before clean beauty came out as a concept, there's already been a lot of work that's been done both in the scientific communities and in the advocacy communities that we're really taking into account. We're seeing health effects that aren't being described, or they don't have all the right answers as to why we're suddenly developing much higher rates of certain health conditions or cancers, things that hadn't appeared before, or that certain communities within our global community or our national communities are more exposed or more at risk. So let's start looking and asking harder questions. And so that's when we started to have, certain chemical groups start to come out as, kind of the sentinels, right? Like bisphenol A, BPA, and bottles, right? That came out, a couple decades ago, really like, wait, what's going on? What are these chemicals doing? And so you start to have this shift in the consumer understanding, or advocacy groups understanding, wait, there's something off here. Let's make a shift. And so what the first, the leaders in what we now call the clean beauty industry, about between 6, 7, 8 years ago, we're starting to say, let's take a look at how we assess safety a little bit differently from the beginning, and start to ask harder questions of ourselves, what we think about safety, and about our supply chain. So that's really where we started to see this movement. It was really pushed from, like I said, from an advocacy perspective, and making us aware that we need to think about safety from different ways than we had, and let's be a bit more precautionary in the way that we start to formulate our consumer goods.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for that very extensive answer. But like you said, it's important to look all the way through the history. And I think that's one of the things that you and I have in common. I love okay, well, what's happened? How do we get here? And how do we do things differently? And so I think when you're talking about taking precautions, um, I don't think it's a bad thing to take the precaution. If you have the ability to take a precaution, why not? With the unknowns. And just thinking about that and the baby bottles, and my little one right here is just climbing up into my lap. Just thinking, a lot of what we do is, for these little guys right here, right? And the protection of them, our bodies, and our future. And so, it's interesting because when I think about the clean beauty, my clean beauty experience, it's really been from the formulation side. And that's my space where I've been working with ingredients, educating formulators and chemists and brands how to use natural alternatives to controversial ingredients. And the conversation is oftentimes very heated and polarized for the industry, and even some consumers now we're seeing that. And so what I most commonly hear is that the conversation is not science-based. That clean beauty is not science-based. So what do you think about this type of approach? I mean, I think that's kind of the elephant in the room, at least like from my side. Excuse me, I'm going to get her just set up really quick. Let's see. So what do you think about that? I don't know if it's a rebuttal or if it's an excuse or it's just a perspective, someone's experience. But what do you think about that type of approach as a PhD chemist and postdoc?
Yeah, and I think it's like most things, it's about perspective, because it's about who is having the conversation and what's the context of the conversation. So once again, from my perspective, when I came into the industry space and I was working in what, like I said, would kind of become the clean beauty space, I didn't have that term in mind. Mm-hmm. It was about, as a scientist, I understand what are the different things that one needs to look at to really get the big picture when we're talking about safety. Mm-hmm. And there are these things that we've kind of, like I said, cancer is something that has been both assessed and kind of understood for hundreds of years. It's been out there. When we talk about things that seem more subtle, and so it's a little bit harder to pin down what the causes are and maybe what all the outcomes are, like with endocrine disrupting chemicals, you're looking at something that's it's a newer science, but it's something that it's still in line with the way that our bodies work. It's just we as humans have a deeper understanding at this time. So for me, science is always evolving. There is nothing static about science. The more that we learn, the more that we engage different perspectives, the more that we test hypotheses, the more we learn, the more we grow. I mean, that's just the nature of science. So even once again, that's why I bring up toxicology. Toxicology also has to evolve, and it's once again, it's not, even though, yes, toxicologists in some way, shape, or form have also existed for hundreds of years in some way, looking at poisons and whatnot. Mm-hmm. It's not a static science. So to me, there really shouldn't be this clash, of ideas between science and the way that we think about the evolution of safety, because it's just that, it's an evolution. So that's really, like I said, it's my perspective, but it's also grounded in just what we see happen. It's just the nature of the way science evolves. So I understand that it can be really confusing when you don't have all the answers and you have to make decisions. And that's what happens to brands. That's what happens to supply chain members is, they've based their business on what they know up until that time and taken a lot of steps to ensure that things are done correctly. And then there's a new piece of information. What do you do with that? So it's almost like this reactivity that gets built into the system because it's the way things have been done, and nobody likes to change the way things have been done. And therefore, to change things, you have to have a lot of proof as to why you need to change things, right? A lot of good reasons. So it's that, I think there's that natural tension about just the timing of making shifts. But that's what I'm seeing is that, like I said, I've been doing this very intentionally within the beauty industry for almost 7 years. And what I can say unequivocally, whatever that word is, it's a little hard to say, is that this shift that we're on in terms of really, increasing the stringency of standards around ingredient safety and increasing sustainability profiles that encompass all different aspects. That also, ingredient safety is part of sustainability. But all of these different things within the marketplace, both nationally here and globally, that shift is already occurring. The trend is being supported by the marketplace, is being supported in some places by regulation, which also helps move the marketplace. And so there's, to me, it's about ensuring that all members of our value chain are understanding that the shift is already in motion. It's not about, let's see if we can stop something that we don't understand or maybe agree with. It's already happening. So I think it's about opening up the lines of dialogue across all members of the value chain and seeing where their pain points are, because every member of the supply chain has a different pain point. And, what I've seen and learned is that as a brand or retailer, you are closest to the consumer. So that the consumer-driven market drivers are very clear to you as to how you're going to be changing the way you do business. The more you move up, upstream in the supply chain, to the manufacturers and suppliers of the raw materials, there's a greater distance to the consumer drivers and maybe some of the regulatory drivers if you're thinking about different markets. And so it becomes a little bit more abstract. Like, wait, why are we making this change? Why is this suddenly a problem? Right? And when you're thinking about safety or sustainability. And so that's where I think breaking down these information silos and really engaging across all members. And I think that's what's so valuable about the work you do, especially through Dandy Day, is you're working to engage across all members of the value chain. We need to be having these conversations. Sometimes they're uncomfortable, but it's already happening. And so let's find ways to support each other so that we actually all reap the benefits of the shifts that are already occurring.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you think about as these shifts are happening, is there something in particular? I have an idea, but why do you think this conversation has come to light? Is there like a broader, more philosophical aspect that you sense about the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're entering a time where there's a lot of access to information at all times from all places. Something that's unprecedented in human history, honestly. I mean, even within my lifetime, right? I don't want to totally age myself, but I can remember when the first DVD came out, and I couldn't even wrap my brain around how you could have information on a disc that provides like an encyclopedia of information. It was like completely mind-blowing to me. So, I mean, when we think about just the pace of information access and the breadth of it, it's a blessing, but it's also a little bit of a curse because we're just swimming in it, and it's coming from all spaces. And it's not to say that it's all bad or good. It's just we as humans also have a limited capacity to understand and digest information. So I might have a certain level of expertise in what I do, but that's where I've focused a lot of my work, right? most consumers, aren't going to have the level of information access or ways to interpret it that I do, just because I've put the time and effort into it for no other reason, right? So it's just that it's the fact that, we have all this access to information, which is exciting and great. And so I think that the positive of that has been that, with contextualization of the issues, which a lot, as I said earlier, a lot of advocacy groups have been doing for a long time in the consumer advocacy space, is really contextualizing the issues and saying why we should be paying attention to some of these things that are impacting our health in different ways. And some of them are, more about, some of these are issues that affect the general population. Some of them have more targeted effects, what we consider vulnerable populations, which are many, but, we tend to consider a vulnerable population, especially in the context of beauty, particularly women, particularly pregnancy is a stage of vulnerability because it's for both the woman and the fetus, and also throughout childhood and puberty. And, then you have also different populations that just have more vulnerabilities, depending on lifetime exposures to other types of harmful chemicals, or also circumstantial stressors in the communities that they live in. So there's just a lot of different things where when you start to contextualize the harm or the potential harm, then that's when it's like, okay, well, how do we focus the solutions for those? And that's really, once again, when we talk about whether it's clean beauty, more sustainable beauty, conscious beauty, green beauty, and now as we're really coming to light a lot more about, in terms of social justice, the environmental injustice of beauty, when we think about communities of color and the disproportionate impacts on their health from products that have been manufactured and marketed specifically to them. So we start to incorporate all of these elements, and that's really, I think, where we need to be, grateful that we have the ability to make these decisions more in a more informed way, and also, being a little bit more savvy about maybe where we're getting our information and how to parse out those entities a little bit better. And I think, there are these so many, everything's like working at an operation, a scaled operation in the way we have to address these issues. A consumer can only do so much. You can advocate like crazy and change can happen. But if your supply chain isn't met the needs that, for the marketplace at large, you're still going to have these bigger issues. Or if regulation hasn't allowed for more standardization of safety, you're going to continue to have a lot of these issues. So it's about all these pieces need to be moving synchronistically and synergistically to really create these bigger changes. But once again, I think it's just, we're able to make more choices at this time than we've ever been able to make before as consumers. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And as you're talking about the information and the vulnerable communities, I just think about equity. So information does lead to equity. And when we are talking about prioritizing those vulnerable communities, including women, pregnant women, and children, those vulnerable populations, that is where this conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion comes into play. And so I think along with that, just thinking more about, just this journey that you and I are on together, and kind of unpacking all of this from a societal standpoint. I'm starting to see the clean beauty movement as part of the feminist movement, as an extension, an expression of the feminist movement. It has a much larger context for women as a group. So when we talk about contextualization, and when we think maybe about the beauty industry in terms of it just being business, the beauty business, and business still as a whole is run by it's still male dominated. It's still, probably not as much diversity as we'd like to see as far as ethnicities are concerned. And so I do see, as these issues come up, right, talking about women's bodies and women carrying children, and even we've heard about in breast milk too, finding chemicals, endocrine disruptors in breast milk. And it's something that, as the more women are realizing this and gathering this information, the more active they're becoming. And so I think from a philosophical perspective, the clean beauty movement is a driver for social change. Yeah. And asking for that social justice, not just asking, but demanding it, demanding social justice. We are going on strike about, for our bodies, for our future. And I think for women, and I'm not going to exclude men, but I know, as a woman, from my perspective as a woman, my view of my existence now is very intentional for the future. It's very intentional for my children. You saw one of my little ones, but I have another daughter and I have 3 stepsons, and I'm thinking about my grandkids. Like, even now, it's like, okay, what do we do now that ensures the future's safety? And actually, my oldest stepson is on the spectrum, and that's another challenge that we have. And there's some very controversial things and questions, like why, what happened, what was that turning point, and why are we seeing these differences? And so anyway, a little bit of a tangent for me, but it is very significant when you're thinking about children and your responsibilities. I think as women, our responsibilities, when we have the power to change that, I think we move, and we move through having that information and knowing that things don't have to be the way that they are. They can be different. They can change. So I know that when we look at feminism in its broader context, that it does have various goals. There are very much more known type of focuses, but I do think as clean beauty is emerging, this will be seen in history as part of that movement, led by women and the feminist movement. So it does continue to adapt in response to that new information. And so I know you do a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, policymakers. You do a lot of work all over the place, and I admire that about you so much. And so one of those organizations is Women's Voices for the Earth, and they are an organization that I learned about from you. And they actually say on their website that they are a feminist, women-led North American environmental organization that specializes in research and advocacy regarding chemicals used in products that disproportionately impact women's health, including cosmetics, menstrual care products, professional salon, and cleaning products. So can you share with us a little bit about what you do with them and about this organization? I think they're just like so awesome.
Yeah, Women's Voices for the Earth is amazing. They've, as an organization, it's been around since, I can't do the year now, but it just celebrated our 25th anniversary. So I'm one of the board members for the organization. Over the last 2 years, I've been participating as a board member, but have known their work for many years and admired the organization's work for many, many years. And yeah, it came out of this, not even ideology, but just as a response to the environmental health movement at the time when it emerged. It was just reacting to the fact that most environmental health organizations were men, were led by men. And so it was really a response to that and saying, I think women have a very clear perspective as to what are the issues that directly impact our health. and we should be kind of in charge of the changes that we want to see, and the voices, and being the voice of that moving forward. So yeah, Women's Voices for the Earth it's a small, I call it a small but mighty organization, has really helped both spearhead and support tremendous shifts in policy that have benefited all of us, both at the state and federal level, over the last, like I said, 25 years. So there's a lot of advocacy work in the policy realm, and also working with and engaging the manufacturers and the retailers of products, of consumer good products that are particularly, particularly with a focus on, as you said, products that are more likely to impact women's health, or femme identifying, or any of the different elements we think about that impact women's health. So it's much more, it's beyond beauty. It's about our everyday exposures to household cleaning products, and, as you said, menstrual products, and so and feminine care products. So it's about how many different ways can we be exposed, and how much can we really be an advocate for change in the way that these products are manufactured, and in the educational process of the consumer and communities that are purchasing them. And one of the things that has been really a wonderful focus and deepening for the organization in the last 2 years, and we're actually expanding on it. We have some really strong strategic vision shifts that are going to be occurring in the next couple of years around this, is really moving more intentionally around the more environmental justice issue impacts of these chemicals. So really focusing on more vulnerable communities and communities of color, and not just on how chemicals or these products impact them, or these exposures impact them, but also bringing up their own voices. That's one thing that I do believe really strongly, is that we need to have diversity in all ways, shapes, and forms in the way that we're internalizing and addressing issues. And a lot of times we forget that sometimes the most impacted communities have the best solutions already in hand, because they've had to be very smart about the way that they kind of maneuver around these injustices. So we need to be uplifting the voices and the solutions and the strategies from those that are in communities that are most highly impacted in different ways. And that's one of the beautiful strengths I see that Women's Voices for the Earth, or we call it Weave, that Weave does, is really create programs to help increase both awareness and also more community grassroots organizing in different communities to build up voices from the ground up.
Oh, that's amazing. And that's the inclusion part, right?
Yeah.
And DEI is being inclusive of those voices. And I see that as what we're doing here in Clean Beauty. And we need to be inclusive of the women's voices, right, that are purchasing the products, that are using the products, that are and what they're saying, what we're saying, and what we need, and what we want to see for our bodies, and for our children in the future. And so I want to go back again to I know we've talked about this extensively, but just again to recap from your experience as a scientist, what are your thoughts and research concerning reproductive health, fetal development, and key stages of child development? Because I think that is so important. So what have you found from your research? Like, and also, like, how long were you in school researching this? Because it was a long time. It was a long time. Like, you were researching.
It's a long time, but it goes in a, just what's the expression, in like a, blink of an eye or whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I've been actively working in reproductive and environmental health since the year 2000. So a little over 20 years.
Yeah.
And, what's always been for me, the driver, both in my research and in the way I engage the work that I do, is that it's just very clear to me since I was young. I was like, I, as healthy, thankfully, as I am, I'm not as healthy as my mother. I'm not as nearly as healthy as my grandmother. And I see these generational shifts in health,
Mm.
and and not just me, but within my family, within my communities. And so I always had that idea, it's like something's off. Um, and so that really was a driver for me, was to understand what are these shifts, what's going on. It has to be more than genetic.
Mhm.
So that's really where that environmental health element came in early on for me. And as I started to really research, like I said, specifically endocrine disruptors, that was work that I began in 2010, so
Mhm.
11 years ago, and deeply immersing myself in the research aspect of it, really understanding how these chemicals interfere with our systems at different stages of development, with early exposures, low dose exposures, um, through exposure routes that are actually likely. So instead of just oral exposure, like, dermal or subcutaneous exposure. So it's understanding that, we really need to have a better understanding of how, and I know it goes beyond the human, but if we just look at the human, how we as humans are exposed realistically to chemicals in our everyday life. Most of us aren't drinking a bottle of arsenic or, you know,
That's not
chomping
how
on some
you start off your
lead,
day.
right?
You don't put a little
So
arsenic in your coffee.
exactly. But it's really about understanding that we're being exposed in every aspect of the way we move through the world. It's in the air, it's in the food, it's in the ground, it's in the water, and it's in what we put on our bodies. And then there's mixtures. Like, that's the other thing, is that we never talk about this. Even in the scientific community, it's a little bit of a taboo. It's not so that it's so taboo, but it's so hard to explain. And how do you even test for it? Chemicals can interact with each other, and we have no way of really easily identifying, well,
Right.
how does a mixture of
Mhm.
chemicals that we use every day affect our health?
Mhm.
So much of it is that, once again, this goes back to the toxicology model versus kind of understanding a little bit more of the subtle realms of how things interact. It's we like to be able to say things with certainty, especially in science, right? And especially in regulation. So we like to be able to say, absolutely, this amount of something will harm you in this way. And that's really what bodies are subtle. We're meant to survive, thankfully, right? So we're meant to kind of find checks and balances within our systems to help us move past things that our body might interpret as dangerous. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have long-term effects, and that doesn't mean it doesn't have cumulative effects. And so this all goes back to this issue of why I truly believe that we need to focus the way we think about safety, ingredient safety at large, as centering the most vulnerable populations. Because when we think about, particularly, once again, pregnancy and fetal development, it's not just our personal exposure, it's that, we're transferring those exposures to the next generation, and they might be transferring those exposures to the next generation. There is a transgenerational effect. And that's also been shown in a lot of scientific studies. So yeah, how do we break that cycle? And how do we live in a world that's, okay, things are already out there. How do we rein it in? I think that's a stage that we're at. And, I am an eternal optimist. So I do believe that even though it seems like, how do we ever turn back the clock from what we've already done? We can. And we have to make real concerted efforts. So, one of the things that I found really, really, especially working in the space around chemical safety and also regulatory shifts and policy shifts, is, things tend to move really slowly in the regulatory
Mhm.
space. But one of the things that I found really fascinating is that when we look at chemical safety, there's a group of chemicals that has really emerged. Scientifically, it emerged quite a long time ago, but our kind of awareness of it has emerged very recently, which is this group of chemicals called PFAS,
Mhm.
fluorinated chemicals. And they're used in so many different applications. A lot of like Teflon is a perfluorinated chemical, right? So it's,
Mhm.
helps things, become nonstick, or increases waterproofing potential. or, water wicking. So we find it in a lot of material goods, but we also find them in personal care products, a lot of long wear products. And they tend to hide, they're chemicals that people haven't been aware of. So they're like, oh, they're not in beauty products, but you look and it's like, oh no, they are. So there's been this huge movement in just the last couple of years about perfluorinated chemicals and bringing them up to the regulatory table and saying, we need to deal with this, because the effects that these chemicals have been shown to have affect, truly almost all aspects of our health. And at all stages of life, like everybody is vulnerable to these. And they have been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier, right? So that's where, once again, becomes a real issue of, these are things that we need to be really aware of for our own health, and then make sure that we're not passing them on unintentionally to the next generation during fetal development. So it's, anyway, just to round out the thing with the perfluorinated chemicals, with the PFAS, there's been this major push. There's been a push internationally to ban them as a class of chemicals. And also here federally, there are some, there's a federal law that's being proposed, and a lot of states are pushing to ban. And I have never seen a push that is that fast and strong for a class of harmful chemicals to date. And it's really exciting, because we all win when we really do all win when we can kind of rein in, especially this type of chemical group that really does have such they're persistent chemicals, and they actually have really, really harmful effects across all sectors and all environments. So it's yeah.
That is a good point, and just as you're talking about how it's come together, everyone's come together to create policy so quickly, and it's been brought to everyone's attention. I think that right, creating the policy, like recognizing it, planning, creating the policy to ensure like what we know, what we've learned and acquired knowledge, placed in action, that is the justice, I think, that we're looking for, right? That is where policy creates the justice. And so, I think we hear these terms all the time: we want justice, social justice, and but we're not actually, I'm not sure we always realize, like, okay, there is a methodology to getting to that place of justice. And so for clean beauty, it is that policy change. Right. It is that movement within our state governments, our federal governments. So we have some kind of policy law that we can all start operating under. Right. And so it's just so fascinating to me that as much as we're like in the daily grind, we forget about some of the more obvious things. And so, I think if anyone is concerned about social justice, working as a chemist in the industry, as someone creating a product, this is a chance to be a part of something greater, and to provide some justice, just to be part of that conversation, and really to help protect those vulnerable communities too. Right. So are there any other comments that you would like to share? You've shared so much, and it's been so wonderful. I just love hearing you talk. So like, I don't have so much to say. I just want to hear you share. So if there's anything else that you'd like to share, we'd just love to hear it, Nicole.
Yeah, I think it's just, thank you, that you encapsulate it so beautifully right there. I think that, I know that there's many ways that you can think about how you shift the marketplace. And, here in the States, we've relied primarily on the marketplace regulating itself. Mm-hmm. You see a different paradigm in Europe in more recent years, with much stronger regulatory shifts to, equal the playing field there, particularly around safety and sustainability. And, what has become very clear to me in all the conversations I've had and the experiences that I've been in, is that there is a place for regulation that is meaningful to, once again, level the playing field. And where we should be leveling the playing field is around safety. We shouldn't be prioritizing one person's health over another. I mean, that to me, that's not how a marketplace thrives, because that's not how communities thrive. So that's really, to me, the power of seeing and pushing for these broader, more comprehensive shifts in federal policy to make sure that everybody gets the same playbook to start. And what that does, and like I said, this has been a very clear example that's come through the European Union, and we've seen with their regulatory shifts that have occurred in the last, 10, more than that, 15 years, particularly around the REACH regulation, where they've standardized how chemicals are both identified and brought into the marketplace. They have very rigorous, regulatory barriers that they have to go through. But it puts the onus on the manufacturers to prove safety, right? And so here we don't have that. The onus is not on the manufacturer. It's basically on the public to advocate for stronger health measures. So what you see and what they have clearly mapped out is that it is incredibly powerful to set the floor from a safety perspective. And it gets everybody working much more synergistically, even at the manufacturing level. Because then you're not trying to compete just on price alone, on cost alone. It's like, okay, well, everybody has to play by this new rule book, so then let's innovate a little differently. What we have here in the States is the ability to innovate much more quickly. And, in part that's been because of less regulation. But I think that's where we can have kind of this blending that is meaningful happen, where we actually set the floor just with some basic safety and sustainability measures that everyone has to follow. And then innovation will always find a way. And so I don't have any concerns that our industry, all consumer goods industry, will continue to find ways to innovate. But it should never be at the expense of our health or the health of the environment. And I think, the consumers are really clear about that. That's what's so exciting, is that, we as a public are saying, yeah, we don't want things that are going to harm myself or my family or the environment. So that's really where there is such potential for innovation to come out. And we should just, once again, agree that chemical safety shouldn't be the barrier for that. We should be beyond that.
So I think also, like, as the countries work and operate differently, it's not to say that one is good and one is bad, but a recognition that that they are different. The way that our countries' geographies operate are different, and so to accept that that's the difference. And so then how do we, as we're in a global market, then what actions and steps do we take as an industry and business to be able to interact in that? And I think that's what you're saying, is that is the opportunity, and that gives us the opportunity to continue to innovate quicker. And I think where we get hung up is that we think, like, well, how are we going to do it? We get hung up in the methodology of, this is what we know, and so this is how we, like, what do we do to change, or how do we even change? And we just get stuck kind of spinning. So I just think that's what I observe, at least when I've worked with a lot of chemists and talking with them and suppliers that are specifically here in the US. And so I think in order to be able to get out of that just spinning state, if we just start taking some steps forward, being open to the conversation, like you said, across the supply chain, can really help. Can really
and learning from other industry spaces. I mean, that's the other thing that, I always encourage suppliers when I speak with them, is, think about beyond the industry that you serve right now. There are applications for the materials, it's the same material is used for probably the same function or similar function across many different industry spaces. And some industry spaces have, made much more broad or much more, bigger leaps in the realm of enforcing chemical safety or sustainability than others. So it's this thing where it's like, if we kind of break down these silos um, and just open ourselves up to having conversations within, maybe if you're a chemist, you just have a chemist, conversation with a chemist that's in, outside of the beauty industry, but
Mhm.
maybe, in some other consumer good industry space, and just see what the conversations are. It's helpful, and I learn a lot. I learn a lot from members of the value chain that have experience and expertise in things that I don't. That's how, you saying I'm too humble. It's like I have no other way to be but humble, because I only know what I know, and I know that what I know is probably going to change.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of being really open to knowing that we're here to participate in conversations. We're here to help and collaborate. We're here to build things in a way that builds community stronger. At least that's the spaces I live in.
Mhm.
um, and so that takes the village, that takes the community,
Right.
and everybody has their bit of wisdom and their experience. That's really what's going to help bring the whole together in a much more coherent and sustainable way. So, like I said, I am an eternal optimist, but I also am quite grounded in the sense that I see the changes that are happening, and I see the long-term impacts of these changes. So I can be confidently idealistic that we are moving in a direction that's really community positive, globally community positive. And so, why not be a part of it? Why not be a
Yeah.
willing, active participant in that? Because it's already happening. So,
Yes. Well, it's so exciting. Thank you so much for your time today, Nicole,
yeah,
and for sharing
it's
so
been my pleasure.
generously. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. We're going to be having so many more conversations,
Yes.
and inviting everyone along to join us and be part of it. And you said we're community, and we have that opportunity. And so I hope everyone takes that away with them from this conversation, that we have the power to create a positive change
Yes.
together. So thank you all for joining us, and make it a great day.